Hello everyone, welcome to another video about Guild Wars 2. It's been a little while since I made my last video, and the last video was talking about theory crafting on Spellbreaker builds, and we're going to do a little bit of theory crafting today as well. So what I have is, since the balance patch, Warriors got a huge buff, and I'm really happy about that. We actually got a nerf to Phalanx Strength, but I think that was okay, because it kind of opened up Warrior for some different roles, because previously in raids and in higher level fractals, Warriors were kind of expected to play the support role all the time, and I don't like to play the support role that much as the Warrior. I like to do DPS. I like to just do as much damage as I possibly can, and I like to feel very powerful as a warrior. That's what I like to feel as a warrior. Even if I'm not exactly super tanky, if I can just feel powerful, feel like I'm doing a lot of damage, then I'm happy. So, luckily, DPS Warrior did get some good changes. We got amazing buffs to Axe, and I think in particular Spellbreaker got a huge buff as well, because of the ability to chain together burst skills with the full counter and everything. Alright, so let's talk about, first we got equipment, so let's go into the equipment. I've got a lot of crap in my inventory. But let's talk about the armor. First of all, I'm running Marauder stats and Runes of the Spellbreaker, meaning 7% more damage if the foe has no boons. Very useful. Also provides extra power and precision. Marauder's gear on all of this. I'm actually working on getting some Ascended armor, but it takes a long time. It's a very slow burn. So we've got that, and then we've got dual axes. I actually meant to put my axes here as the main set. The main part of this build revolves around axes. Okay, that is the main thing. So the axes are also Marauder's gear, and you've got the Superior Sigil of Accuracy, which is giving you an extra 7% chance to critical, and Superior Sigil of Force, which just gives you a plus 5% flat damage boost. Amazing stuff right there. So then for trinkets and stuff, I've got generally just Berserker stuff. I got Assassin stuff on the amulet and stuff. And I'm trying to get something other than this. I'm trying to get all Assassins or Berserkers, if possible. But it's going to take a little while. So the main point that I wanted to make is that your gear needs to be mostly Marauder's gear. Assassins works too, but it's more glassy, and I preferred to be a little less glassy this time around, so I went with the Vitality option, and Marauders works well. So this provides me a total of 24,500 health, whereas before I was like down in the low 19,000s, I believe. And so a lot more health that you can use to destroy your enemies. Very good. So let's talk about the skills. We got these axe skills. I mean, if you're an experienced warrior, you already know about the axe skills, but they've gotten huge damage buffs. Okay, so the Cyclone axe has gotten a flat damage buff. The throw axe does 50% more damage if they're below half health, and 100% more damage if they are at below a quarter health, which is insanely high. It just does so much damage. Plus, if you're using Axe Mastery, then it recharges faster and all that. I can't remember if Dual Strike got a buff, but I know that Whirling Axe got a buff. It got a big bonus in damage, so that's excellent. Next, for the healing skill, we got Natural Healing. If you're using a Berserker, it would be a different build, and of course even more different if you're using Core Warrior. Perhaps you would use To the Limit for extra adrenaline, something like that. But I'm using Natural Healing. It's an excellent heal skill, removing boons, but when you remove the boons, they fix the bug where now you get Attacker's Insight. So when you heal and you remove all those boons, you're also getting a whole bunch more ferocity and power, which is going to be so useful. Next, I've got Featherfoot Grace. This is really one of my only defensive skills that I actually have. This is not very defensive. It's mostly glassy, but it's less glassy than my old build. So Let me actually go into build here so I can just look at it here. But Featherfoot Grace, I love this skill. It's a big burst of super speed, and you're immune to conditions during the thing, and if you're stunned or immobilized because you have resistance, then you can just break out of that immediately and go and run away or run toward an enemy. It depends on what you would want to do, where your health is and all that and everything. Then we've got two physical skills. We got Bull's Charge and Kick, and you'll see that both of them use peak performance and remove immobilization. Now, interesting that they would do that. We're going to talk about those in a second. This is actually, it has CC, which is good. It has crowd control, but the main reason is actually for that peak performance. So we're going to talk about it in a second. For the elite skill, I've got Signet of Rage. For the elite skill, you could opt to go for Rampage, actually, which previously I saw as kind of like an underpowered skill, but you could go for Rampage, and it would also give you the peak performance. You're going to do a lot more damage with this skill because of peak performance, but I go with Signet of Rage because I like to use the Adrenaline. And also, as a Spellbreaker, it kind of fits the theme more, I believe, to not go with Rampage, because the Spellbreaker is more calm and collected and everything. So with traits, I've actually given up the defense trait. Before, I used to see that as kind of mandatory if you wanted to be at all tanky. But I don't think it's mandatory for this build. It's actually really not required. I think actually strength would be the required thing for this build. And for that, I have peak performance. Now, they made a change for peak performance. It no longer increases the damage of your physical skills, but instead, when you use a physical skill for 5 seconds, you do 33% more flat damage, and that puts this build in such a good position because you're able to use Bull's Charge when you enter a fight. That's just a flat... What I like to do is I like to do Bull's Charge and then go into skill 5, and then possibly like do Eviscerate, and you get the Berserker's Power at the end for an extra 7% damage, and then you do Kick for an extra 33% to reapply that, and then do your other axe skills, right? And you're just ending up doing so much more damage. The Berserker's Power combined with peak performance is an extra 40% flat damage. It's just so good. And combine that with all the might that you can get, combine that with critical hits and all your ferocity that you're getting, it's insane. Okay, the next one is Great Fortitude. That's what gives me so much extra health. If we're running a great sword and we want that extra might generation, we can switch to this, and you can see we go down to 22,200 health, almost 22,300 health. Okay, so you can have extra might generation, but it's not quite as tanky. So if you go Great Fortitude, that's going to give you an extra 2,000 health, and it's very useful for that. I would say that it really has saved me on many occasions, having that extra bit of health. And next, we've got Berserker's Power. That's really the main thing here. I suppose you could be using a hammer on this build as your other weapon for extra CC, but it's not really too required. But it does synergize well with the physical skills. So it's really up to you. You could choose Merciless Hammer or Berserker's Power. I go with Berserker's Power because I'm not using a hammer, but occasionally I might try it. I might try that in the future. Now, Berserker's Power will actually stack the more burst skills you use, and the amazing thing is, Spellbreakers are able to use burst skills quite often, especially in an intense fight where the enemy is hitting a lot, because what we can do is you can use Eviscerate, and then go straight to full counter, and each one of those will trigger Berserker's Power. And then, after you full counter, it will recharge Eviscerate, then use it again. Now you've got 3 stacks of Berserker's Power. That's an extra 21% damage, plus from peak performance you're getting a total of, what, 54% extra damage. And that's a lot of damage. So, you're getting that, and then if you need some more, you can switch over to Greatsword or whatever your weapon is. You could do the burst there, because you're going to gain Adrenaline, because you gain Adrenaline when you weapon swap because of discipline. We're going to get into that in a second. Gain Adrenaline, and so you're going to be able to use this burst skill again. Then you attack for a little bit more, perhaps you do 100 blades or something like that. Then you use full counter again, which recharges this, and you use this again. Then you weapon swap again, and you start all over. So the rotation can get a little bit complicated, but it can do a ton of damage, and that is so good. That is just something that I'm really happy about. So let's talk about discipline. Discipline is the second trait here, and it's really, I feel like, required for this because of the usefulness of axes now. So first of all, we got the warrior sprint. Whenever you use a movement skill, it removes immobilization. Okay, this is very useful. I thought about perhaps using vengeful return sometimes, but I think probably the better one to use here is warrior sprint, because that means that your burst skill and bull's charge and kick all remove immobilization, so you cannot be immobilized. You are just practically immune to immobilization. Adding to that the fact that you run faster. Running faster is very important when you're only wielding melee weapons. So you've got that. Next, I've got the destruction of the empowered, increased damage per boon on your target. This would be particularly useful in PvP. It's not as useful in PvE, which means you can sometimes just use Brawler's Recovery, where you will just remove conditions whenever you swap weapons. Which would be good if you're using a really intense rotation and you're having to swap weapons all the time. It could add an extra Condi Cleanse to you. Or if you really want to play supportive, then you can switch to Inspiring Battle Standard. Perhaps you could change out Bull's Charge with one of the banners, Strength or Defense or what have you. And then you could also grant regeneration, especially with the banner of defense. That would synergize well. Okay. Then your burst skills gain reduced recharge. This is really important because you want to proc that Berserker's power. And also the Mage Bane Tether, if you've got that equipped for Spellbreaker. This is another thing where Spellbreaker gets a buff. So that's really useful there. And then you've got Axe Mastery. Okay, it's extra ferocity when you've got an axe, extra adrenaline when you crit with an axe. And remember, most of your hits are going to be crits, which means you're getting all that extra adrenaline. And then 20% reduced recharge on axe skills. So useful. And I found this, I've tried both of these. I've tried Axe Mastery and Burst Mastery, and I found that Burst Mastery is not as effective as Axe Mastery in this build. It's very effective in other builds with the Spellbreaker, particularly with double daggers. Maybe if you choose double daggers, you might be able to make that work. But in this one, Axe Mastery just does so much more damage. And you're still able to chain together bursts pretty well, even though you don't get that extra adrenaline when you burst. It's also a flat 7% damage increase on burst skills, which is pretty cool. But the 300 ferocity does better, because if you look at this, let's just real quick, 300 ferocity, and you've got 213% or almost 214% critical damage. If you switch away from that, 194%, which means you're gaining almost 20% extra critical damage, and most of your hits are criticals when you do this. You could even bring yourself to almost 100% chance to critical if you actually pop Signet of Rage, because then your chance to crit goes up to 91.5%. And that's just almost every single one of your hits is going to be criticals. So, so back to this. Now we've got Spellbreaker. Generally, Pure Strike is really good because if they're boonless, which is most of the time in PvE, then you're dealing an extra 14% critical damage. That's like a flat increase of ferocity almost. It's really good. If you're not tanky enough, then you could choose Guard Counter. If you're having problems tracking down your enemies, then you could do this, No Escape, because the stuns here from Bull's Charge and Kick would allow you to immobilize them as well. Spellbreaker, again, they get a really big buff here because if you're using physical skills, you're also still going to be removing boons, which makes Spellbreaker versatile even when you're not using the daggers. It's so good. Okay, And then next, I'm running slow counter. This is to kind of like cripple enemies that are trying to attack me. However, you could choose loss aversion if you're generally fighting against people with a lot of boons. This one is not too important. This line here, the master trait, I believe it's called. Attacker's Insight is so useful, and I'm gonna talk about it now. They fixed a bug where, see, before, when you removed your own boons from natural healing, it would not apply this. You're supposed to get it when you remove boons, but it would only give it to you when you removed enemies' boons. And so now they fixed that, where if you've got a bunch of boons with natural healing and you use natural healing and you lose all of them, you gain 5 stacks of Attacker's Insight. That is an extra 300 ferocity. That's an extra 20% critical damage, and then an extra 300 power, which is an extra 30% damage over the base. So you could see all these percentage-based boosts that we're getting. Because we're Spellbreaker, because we're using axes, because we're using physical skills, the synergy is insane. Okay? Next, you really have 2 main choices here. You've got Revenge Counter if you want to do more damage with your full counter, and also with the Condition Cleanse. Actually, I don't think it's a cleanse, it's a copy. So it's so if you want to do more condition, play more with conditions, or if you're fighting enemies with a lot of conditions, then you could just like copy them. You could use that, would do more damage. However, you can also use Magebane Tether. Remember how we're chaining together burst skills? You got Eviscerate, full counter, Eviscerate, then you switch, then you got Arcing Slice, then full counter, then Arcing Slice again, then you switch, and you blah blah blah. You do all that, you're gonna get a crap ton of might. Because when you, okay, every second that they are tethered, which is 8 seconds, okay? Every second you're gaining 3 might. And so because of that, it ends up giving you, let me see, 3 times 8, it gives you 24 might from Magebane Tether. And if you're chaining together bursts like that, then you're just getting all of this might. You're just maintaining 25 stacks of might all the time. It's just going to be constantly tethering them to you. Oh, however, it is on a 12-second cooldown. I forgot about that. But still, you're going to be gaining a ton of might, which is just, it's so much more useful, I believe, than Revenge Counter. In this case, maybe in certain cases, the Revenge Counter is better, but the 24 might, I forgot how much it was. Let me see. 10 might is 300 power, right? 10 might is 300 power. 20 might is 600 power plus an extra 150 is 750 extra power, which is an extra 75% damage increase. So you got 75%. Actually, this is not based on a percentage. It's just based around the base power. So that's not a percentage, but you're getting an extra 750 power here if you can maintain all that might. In addition, you're gaining extra 14% damage here, which would pull your critical damage up to about 227%. And then plus, you've got the ferocity here. That's really what is adding to it there. Then you've got an extra, if you're chaining together bursts, you got an extra 21% damage, which means, I don't know if this applies to the critical damage as well, but if that's true, then it would bring it up to like 248% critical damage. And then, I might be doing the math wrong, but just bear with me here. And then you've got peak performance, which would bring your damage up to 281% when you make a critical. So I've been able to get so much DPS with this build. That's really my main point. Now, the one last thing I want to talk about is the secondary weapons. So as a warrior, I always keep a bunch of secondary weapons with me, because it's just, warriors are masters of arms, so why would you not keep all the weapons on you? So, For secondary weapons, you could go Greatsword. Greatsword does some pretty good damage sometimes. It's also pretty good if you want to generate extra might. Usually I do not use that. Usually I use my Elonian recurve here, and that will give me some conditions, but mainly the thing is that it will give me more damage, or more range damage. And range damage is particularly important. Sometimes there are just encounters where you just can't attack melee, and so you just got to switch to the bow. You've also got a rifle in case you want to do more flat damage with it. Generally, I don't use rifle, but I've got one on hand just in case. If you want more boon removal, if you want more playing with that, then equip double daggers by all means. You know, you could just do that, and perhaps you could do skill 5, which would give you a bunch of adrenaline, and it would also apply 14 stacks of vulnerability. Then you could do a physical skill, which gives you the peak performance. Then do breaching strike, and then do the disrupting stab and wastrel's ruin. That could be absolutely insane. Okay, so that would be absolutely insane. I would have to test that on the golem, but you know, that's basically what it is. But now I'm going to show you a bit of combat. So I'm going to venture out, and here I actually prepared for this, which is rare. I prepared for this. So you jump into combat, you do your Bull's Charge, you do this, and you're doing so much damage to everybody around you with the whirling axe. And then you're doing the eviscerate, the full counter, then eviscerate, then you switch, and then you can do the disrupt or the breaching strike. And look at that, we just killed all those guys all the way right there. We got all this might, we heal, we get the attacker's insight. Okay, we just disposed of those enemies so fast, and all it took was actually one physical skill. In longer fights, you can actually you can end up using more physical skills. I've actually been all out of kicks because I've been using all of them just for the damage bonus. And frequently in fractals, I end up making top spot on DPS, which is really cool. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you about. Very, very cool warrior builds. If you've got a warrior build that you would like me to try, if you have a warrior build that's really been working for you, particularly Spellbreaker builds, but I could go for any other builds. I don't like condition builds, and so this is why I really, really love this build. It's just based on power, just flat damage, and I'm okay with sacrificing a little bit of the damage. I'm okay with just bursting in damage and sort of cooling down a little bit after that, as long as I'm just dealing flat damage and not conditions, because I just don't like playing those. But I just really think there's a lot of synergy here, and I really think that ArenaNet did so well by buffing Warrior a lot. Power Warrior a lot for once. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to share today. Feel free to suggest anything to me in the comments or whatever. I want to thank you everyone for watching this. I know it's been a long time, it's kind of a long video, but I tried to keep it as concise as possible. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.